Good morning, Gamecock fans. Time for coffee. JC Shurburt here with you. Some later in the evening happenings, downright late night, depending on what time you go to bed at night. I know I go to bed earlier than I used to, but around 9:40 p.m. Eastern time last night, South Carolina got another transfer portal addition. Brandon Cisse, who we talked about yesterday, cornerback, defensive back from NC State. The Gamecocks won a pretty solid recruiting battle for Cisse. Beat Ole Miss head to head. Lane Kiffin, of course, trolled a little bit by tweeting out he was in Sumter in Raleigh to meet with him. He visited there. Ole Miss wanted him to shut it down and commit, and he kept the visit on the books to South Carolina. Visited South Carolina, and the pull of home was just too much for the Rebels to overcome. And the Gamecocks had that in their back pocket the entire time. He did not visit Florida this past weekend, decided to shut it down. So, what are the Gamecocks getting? I've said this before. He's one of those too good not to take players. Carolina wasn't necessarily in the market for another corner, but he got in the portal. He's from Sumter. He's had a really good 2 years in Raleigh. Played a bunch, played on special teams as a true freshman, and then started this past year. Played a lot at nickel, a lot at corner, more at corner than nickel. But the Gamecocks using nickel in their defense. And if you sort of look at next year's secondary, there are a lot of players, but there's one big gap they have to fill, and that's Nick Emanware back at safety. So what do you do? And the beauty of nickel is if you got a guy like Cisse, who's a really physical corner, he can tackle, stop the run, cover, all that good stuff. You can slide a corner in there. Jalewis Solomon was a backup at nickel for a while. It's just Jelon Kilgore, so good, never came off the field, hardly. Kelvin Hunter, on the other hand, who was the other backup nickel, is a safety. He's going to be a redshirt freshman next year from Florence, and a really good player. West Florence, not South Florence, where the Sellers brothers are from, but Florence nonetheless. So, if you look at it, that nickel spot can be manned by an either or type of guy. So the question becomes, do you slide Kilgore back to safety, which will give you two veterans in Kilgore and DQ Smith? Is Peyton Williams going to be back there and to be able to be a starter? We forget about a guy that redshirted this year that's pretty doggone good, Jabari Sandy from DC. Washington, D.C. It's easy to forget about Jabari because he committed Zabari. I messed that up. Zabari Sandy from D.C. It's easy to forget about him because he was a very early commit in the 2024 class, or 2023 class, actually, the one where they got Nick Harbor. And we sometimes forget about those guys, especially I think he was a high 3-star guy. And so it's easy to kind of forget about those dudes. And ends up, he comes to South Carolina, really looked good last year. And then unfortunately, tore his ACL and was out for the whole year. But Zabari Sandy is a dark horse to kind of get back, get healthy, and get back and get in that competition. And then, of course, you also got Gerald Kilgore, Jelon Kilgore's brother, that was a transfer in from Tennessee Tech. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention David Bucci, who played as a true freshman back at safety as well from Savannah, Georgia. I need to smack myself in the face this morning, right? Trying to get this to you guys a little earlier today since yesterday was the first day. But anyway, yes, so there's a lot of questions back there for that one safety spot. If you do have the luxury of moving Kilgore back, that usually means you probably have a solution at nickel. Is it Kelvin Hunter as a guy that can Kelvin Hunter give you that depth? Will you play Cisse there? Will you just leave him at corner? Could it be another corner like Judge Collier playing nickel? Will they just leave everybody at corner and rotate them and leave Kilgore at nickel and just simply have another safety? That's what I'm leaning towards because the coaches that have been here, I mean, that's why the Wendell Gregory thing surprised me a lot last year when he just went to edge quickly. because they usually will leave a guy there. Usually any position changes are made during the off season, and it's just like they sort of just work the guys at the spots they're at. Of course, we kind of went through an adventure at nickel 2 years ago, and it was ugly until they finally settled. Two things happened. They got the defense better that year. They settled on Kilgore at nickel and Emanware and Smith on the back end. And then they ended up playing more three-man front, which was better for the types of defensive linemen and linebackers and all that at the time. They didn't have any defensive ends in 2023 hardly. And so, basically when you went to that three-man front, Tonka Hemingway was one of your ends, and, he was a lot better suited to get things done. But anyway, we could go back and we could take a historical look at the 2023 South Carolina defense at some point later. But so Cisse is a guy that gives you a lot of flexibility with regards to the secondary in 2025. I think that he's a really good player. He's physical. He's big, 6 foot, 182 pounds, probably be up to 190 by the time he ends up playing next season at South Carolina. And the beauty of the transfer portal sometimes, because it's never a good thing when you pass on an in-state player and he goes to another Power Four. And NC State, as I've said before, does a really good job of recruiting guys in South Carolina. Dare I say that the Gamecocks aren't necessarily going to take and turning them into pretty good players and contributors. You don't want to sit there and watch that guy be all ACC or go to Ole Miss and be all SEC, and everybody's sitting there talking about how he's from Sumter. It's just something you don't want, no matter how good your situation is at a position. And look, man, let's be honest. You're one injury away from not having a good situation at corner. Because you basically are going into next year with three pretty good ones. In Collier, Bakari Swain, and then Miles Norwood, who you also got from the portal. Well, what if one of those guys gets hurt? Well, then you're down to two, and you got to rely on somebody else that hasn't played. Now, is Jalewis Solomon probably going to play next year? Yeah. The question is, again, it's a corner or nickel thing. If he's out there at corner, he can compete and get in the rotation. But that's an if, and so with this, although the Gamecocks were going to be fine, on paper, because that's all you could do with your roster is get it set up on paper. And then it's a very organic thing as far as what happens. Guys get hurt. Guys aren't as good as you thought. Guys are better than you thought. That's why you practice and compete and practice. I mean, it's way, way, way more organic and fluid than we like to make it. And I think a lot in society these days, because it used to be, we just kind of, we're excited to look at the depth chart and everybody's good and everybody's optimistic. And, you go, well, this guy was a 4-star, 3-star, whatever, maybe. Now it's like there's everybody's just fired up about who the third team tackle is, and demanding excellence on paper for it, and that's fine. I get it, and here's why. I think fantasy football has a lot to do with it. It's a lot of the same folks that are the diehards out there, and chances are, you may not be a complete diehard if you're listening to this. If you're on thebigspur.com, I consider you a diehard. The diehards, mostly, they're into things like fantasy football. Not all of them, but most of them. And so I get it. And what do we do with our fantasy football teams? We're not even, we're just like looking at raw numbers. We're looking at what the experts say, and we're trying to optimize our team, And so, hey, when you're looking at the Gamecocks, you're looking at raw numbers, you're looking at what the experts say, you're trying to optimize the entire team to go to battle on Saturdays in the fall, for lack of a better term. So I think that's kind of a part of it too. Is people kind of look, and when they make these opinions, I think the college football media, absolutely plays fantasy football in their head, and I don't know that that's a terrible way to do it. I think it leads you to being wrong, because, like I said before, to put a bow on this. The original point, college football rosters are very organic. They're not, they're not linear type data metrics. They're not computers. They're not Skynet from Terminator. They're not Hal from 2001 to give a very very loose Gamecock reference there. They're not AI, that movie with Haley Joel Osment, which was very sad at the end, by the way. He's at the bottom of the ocean. He'd lived to be 1,000,000 years. Got back, Earth's completely different. Just wanted to be loved. A modern day Pinocchio, if you will. Anyway, I don't want to get off track with that. It's too early. But yeah, so that's the question here. Let's see, say it leads to a lot of other additional questions that nobody has the answers to. Not Clayton White, not Toran Gray. I'll tell you this though, with the exception of 2023, when it was hard for them to. I mean, they didn't. I don't want to say they struggled, but they had to kind of experiment until they got it right, and they got it wrong early with who plays nickel, who plays safety, and I'm talking about with Eamon Warray, Jelon Kilgore, and DQ Smith. Obviously, Florida game, Mississippi State game, both at home, loads of passing yards given up, and a lot of it was because of that. Those guys were just not comfortable at the different positions or didn't know them. And once they switched them up down the stretch, things got better. You didn't really see it until later in the year because Carolina's, after that Florida game, they're going to A&M. They're going to Missouri, who was really good. Jacksonville State's was just a ridiculous scheme matchup and stuff. But then by the time Vandy rolled in and Kentucky and even Clemson, that defense played well, and especially in the secondary. So, that's a question, but it's an important question. It's an important question to get right. This coming into this season, though, the good news is there's a lot more answers there. Sorry, not definite answers. Again, it's organic. A lot more potential answers. You have a Kelvin Hunter, you have a Jalewis Solomon going in their second year. I mentioned Zabari Sandy earlier on the back end. David Bucci's going in. David Bucci's going into his second year, and as a player, they're very high on. Plus, you have Kilgore back. Plus, you have DQ Smith, who's a downright veteran now, going into his fourth year. So the back end, the way back end, is going to be very interesting. The back seven in general, I think now is looking pretty doggone good, considering the number of players South Carolina's losing overall on this defense, including a bunch up front. But they lost some guys in the back too. Donald Fortune's probably getting drafted. I know Nick Eamon-Warray is getting drafted. You got completely gutted at linebacker. So the whole back seven is it's funny because there's a front seven and a back seven, but there's only 11 players. So I don't know. Select your alignment and to make your point and support your narrative, JC. That's fine. But anyway, it's the back end, back seven. They've done a good job. You talk about the linebackers. Okoronkwo, obviously, big pickup. Tony Morrell on thebigspur.com had some really good insight on what Alabama thought about him before he left and kind of where he was heading in that program. You got Sean Murphy, who Nick Saban gave his sign off on to the Carolina coaching staff. Those are coming in from the portal. Slew of linebacker types led by Donovan Darden coming in. And also, I did want to mention Josh Smith from over in Blythewood. No, God, Blythewood. That's strike three, JC. You're out. Over in Dutch Fork. Kid that was committed to Coastal. How about that? 6'2", 230. He's going to be a linebacker at South Carolina. He ended up being a player out of high school. It's too good not to take. And Clemson had him on campus too. They're funny. Kids that look like they're going to South Carolina, they're not getting offered by Clemson. But they had some interest there. And he's a good player. So I'm not, I always mention Donovan Darden, and I love Donovan Darden. I really love his ability to rush the passer off the edge, but the feedback you get from the Shrine Bowl where he played linebacker was pretty solid. So I'm like, okay, let's roll, And he's kind of a bigger Fred Johnson type, big 6'4" guy. Smith 6'2", 225, 230. Don't rule him out at linebacker. So, they've done a good job replacing those guys. And they only play two at a time most of the time. And if you get Bam Martin Scott back, great. I haven't heard much on that lately. But, with the NCAA and appeals process, they are on their own timeline. And I think that sucks. I think a lot of people would be a lot more forgiving of the NCAA, and people, at least some people, would be on their side with all these changes if they weren't like just moved at their own pace. They're like the freaking DMV, and it's because of how they're structured. You have to have a committee full of people that don't know anything about sports, that look at or have very limited knowledge of sports, that don't really care about individuals, that are power hungry, that sit there and decide to vote. I mean, it just gives me a headache. Again, it's too early, people, too early. So back to Brandon Cisse, he gives the defensive staff a lot of options on the back end. He is a very good player. He is probably going to be one of the many South Carolina state of defensive backs to go to the next level if he continues on his trajectory. I'm not saying he's going to step on the field and look like an NFL corner next year. God forbid. We don't need to call people NFL. We don't need to use that word because Will Muschamp said that about Colin Hill. I repeated it, and I don't think anybody's ever lived that down, right? So I'm not saying, Deion Sanders is going to be lining up at corner or nickel for the Gamecocks next year. But I do think he's got that type of upside and ability, good size, physical, just a really good-looking player. I mean, I don't know if he is later-ish bloomer, because you can't call him a late bloomer. I mean, the guy played as a true freshman, Power 4 level, ACC or not. And NC State recruits really well on defense. I mean, they're not chopped liver on that side of the ball. At least his first year. They were terrible this year. God awful in Raleigh. Ooh. When I saw Western Carolina light him up, number one, I liked it because Kerwin Bell runs Steve Spurrier's offense. That's the closest thing. You got two things that were close to Steve Spurrier's offense. You got what Kerwin Bell does, which is kind of the pure fun and gun. 1996-ish, not the old one where he's under center running play action the whole time. And then number two was G.A. Mangus and what he did at his stops. But what he did was kind of a combination of the App State zone read run game and what Spurrier ran on the passing game. And that's what you saw. I mean, really, in reality, that ended up being Steve Spurrier's offense at South Carolina. So I enjoyed watching Western Carolina play that night. Plus, it was Thursday and there was nothing else on. Remember we had good Thursday night games opening weekend of college football? What happened to that? Western Carolina, NC State, it's a showdown. It ended up being a hell of a game, but that NC State defense at that point, I'm like, these guys are bad. But not Brandon Cisse. You can get a great player off a bad team. I mean, it happens all the time. So, and NC State kind of, in fairness to those cats up there, are wolves. Those crazy cats at NC State. They're not cats, they're wolves. They turned it around. They got a bowl, which is kind of what Dave Dorn always does. I think they beat Chapel Hill again. All is not lost. I just remember Tennessee and Clemson kicking their teeth in at the beginning of the year. I mean, Clemson scored, 59, Tennessee 51. We were all like, oh, Tennessee and Clemson have very good offenses this year. Turns out they don't. NC State was just that bad. But yet, SMU, they played a fine. Sir, SMU played a fine strength of schedule this year. They're in the ACC. Oh, God. Headache. So Cisse, did really, really well there and played a lot. And I watched him. You watched them and, knew I was like, well, this is a good player. So he's not a late bloomer. He's been playing for a while. And now he's not a miss in recruiting. Why did the Gamecocks not take him? At defensive back, Toran Gray knows what he wants. And he has a very specific set of critical factors he looks for. he targets a handful of guys and he goes gets them, and that served him well. I don't know. Cisse maybe didn't have a great camp, and in the camp setting, you can really get a lot about a corner because you're not in pads, but you are covering. You can see hip movement, covered skills, change of direction, all that. So maybe he just didn't have a good camp. Maybe he got better between his senior year and in high school, freshman year. Maybe he got hurt. I don't know. There could be like a story there, though. Maybe there's an injury back there or something that I have not researched. But, he's from Sumter. That is becoming quite a little pipeline for the Gamecocks. That's pretty good because there's ball players over there at all the schools. Sumter High mostly, but those other schools, Lakewood, Crestwood, they all put out players as well. It's a great place to recruit. It's right down 378. Not a bad drive. It's kind of one of those places close to Columbia, but not too close. So you don't have kids that go to South Carolina from Sumter stay at home. They're kind of home, but they're not at home. I mean, you're far enough away from mom and dad, in Columbia, which I guess would be the big city compared to the town that has Shaw Air Force Base in it, one of the great little towns in South Carolina. So good for the game guys to get him back. Good to win. I mean, transfer portal decisions and wins against other schools are not necessarily, you don't sit there and have trophies about them like you do maybe some other things where you go, man, they beat those schools on this guy. But, Ole Miss is very, very good in the portal. Maybe a little too arrogant trying to come into the state of South Carolina, trying to get a South Carolina kid. Florida certainly has done well at times, picking players off. And, Billy Napier's got a lot of ties to the state, especially to Sumter. I get it. But those are two schools from the SEC that wanted this guy, and he ended up coming back to South Carolina, so that's good. All right, quickly, just wrapping things up here. Tomorrow night, Wednesday night, the Gamecocks will return to action on the hardwood. On the show yesterday, we talked this Auburn basketball game to death. Talked with Whittle, talked with Mike Morgan about it. It does seem the consensus is the team looked pretty good without Jamari Thomas, and the consensus, the question now is like, what's going to happen when he comes back? I don't want to sit here and talk about this for the next 3 or 4 weeks because there's a lot of basketball to be played, and if Carolina doesn't win a chunk of these, doesn't have to be a significant chunk, but they're not going to be in position for it to matter much. I mean, I don't know. Will the 16th place team in the SEC in a winning record get in the NIT? I don't know if you'll get an automatic berth because I think it's the first 2 that don't make it. So if 12 get in, 13, 14. At large, though, I don't know. Their net ranking is not that good compared to everybody else. So they have to do some winning. My hope is maybe we saw some signs of going back to the style of basketball that, won them 26 games last year, and that they're going to be a tough out and beat some teams. That's what Mike Morgan thinks. He said it the other day. So 6:00 p.m. tip-off in Nashville at Vanderbilt. I guess the 24/7 sports site publishers that do the basketball poll have Vanderbilt 15th, right ahead of the Gamecocks. I don't know about that, man. I mean, I just don't know. I think they're probably better than LSU, at least. And I don't know that they're not. I don't know what people are thinking. I think they're just putting it there because it's Vandy, right? Oh, it's Vandy. And in everything with baseball, it's like, oh, it's just Vandy. I think the folks that vote in that poll too are, oh, it's just South Carolina. I saw it in the football poll, man. I'm like, yeah, Carolina. They kind of voted like the playoff committee did. I'm a voter, by the way, and I didn't vote Vandy 15th. I voted South Carolina 16th because what am I supposed to do? When they're 0-3, they have the lowest net. They escaped Presbyterian. I mean, now football, I think I had them top 4 at one point toward the end when they were really getting cooking. especially after the Clemson game when the playoff committee was just, but nah, they ended up like, I think anyway, the 24/7 Sports SEC poll publisher polls. That's what they are. It's like my site. I'm the Big Spur vote, and then everybody else has a vote from the sites. They do it just like the playoff committee, and in basketball they do it just like the AP poll. So I guess that's what it is. I love voting in it, and I have a lot of respect for everybody that does. But that was interesting to me that Vandy was 15th. So I don't know. I think both teams probably see this as an opportunity. Vanderbilt's already won an SEC game, though. I believe they beat LSU. So I don't know, they're not 0-3, But by God, you can't put them ahead of the mighty Oklahoma Sooners and Texas Longhorns, by God, who are combined 0-6 in hoops. That's surprising. Football would not. Football, Oklahoma struggles in football surprise means zero, right? And Texas, when I saw their schedule, I'm like, they'll probably win 10 games, 11 games, and they did. They won 13. Texas went 13-3. What a weird record. Anyway, but it didn't surprise me. I mean, the Big 12, sorry, that didn't surprise me. This a little bit because the Big 12 is such a good basketball conference. I think what we're seeing in hoops this year, though, is just it's a freak show. I mean, it probably will never be this strong again. But it is strong. So, wow, everybody's pretty good. But but God forbid anybody ranks them. Vanderbilt, who's actually won a game, yes, see, it's crazy. It's like the rules apply for the record in one instance and head to head and all that when it's convenient, and then it doesn't in others. So who the heck knows? Anyway, I don't want to go off on polls. All right, so this has been Coffee. I want to remind everybody to support name, image, and likeness at South Carolina. Go to garnettrust.com. Sign up for the $10 a month membership today. If you give 50 or more a month, I can tell you there's some special things coming your way. There's benefits to all of it, though, including members-only events that I know we're going to be, I say we because I do some consulting work for them. We're going to be announcing pretty soon. Going to be an exciting spring with Garnet Trust. I'll just say this, South Carolina, and the revenue share and all that's coming, that's going to help. And that's going to mean the collectives and the NIL part of it has to generate less money than maybe it once did, but it's still got to generate money. It's probably between 3 and 7 million most schools are eyeing on the NIL end. And that now is it's not donors anymore. It's a membership generation, other revenue streams, business partnerships, including direct sales, advertising business partnerships, things like that, marketing type of things. But the memberships are a big core of it. And there's power in the Gamecock Nation, obviously. $10 a month will get you there. And I'll have some other things to say on the NIL end right here on Coffee. If you're wondering what the hell Coffee is, it's something new starting this year that we're going to do on Inside the Gamecocks on thebigspur.com, kind of on our podcast end of things and our YouTube page, Chief Sports South Carolina. It's going to be like just a morning video. Maybe it'll be live at some point, maybe not. Right now, it's definitely taped for the foreseeable future, just to give you kind of a little burst of Gamecocks in the morning. This one's been a little bit too long because we had to talk about a transfer portal edition, and that gets long, as we all know. But I'm going to sign off because I've got to get this out to you guys and gals, and I appreciate you listening. Be sure to hit subscribe on this channel, Chief Sports South Carolina. If you're listening on the podcast, be sure to go rate us 5 stars on the Inside the Gamecock stream. And as always, download the Chief Sports app, join thebigspur.com, and all that good stuff. You can catch me and my happy face and Hale and Tony and Whittle and the gang. And it's one of the best message boards in all of sports, although it can get a little crazy sometimes. All right, JC out. See you guys later today on Inside the Gamecocks, the show.